The Velthari Empire had conquered 17 star systems. Their warriors had never lost a single war. They were tall, strong, and covered in thick scales that could stop a blade. Each Velthari soldier had 4 arms and eyes that could see in the dark. They believed they were the greatest fighters in the galaxy, and no one had ever proved them wrong. When humanity joined the Galactic Coalition, the Velthari did not think much of them. Humans were small. They had soft skin and no claws. They could not see in the dark or breathe underwater. To the Velthari, humans were weak creatures from a small planet at the edge of known space. The diplomatic cruiser, Horizon's Edge, carried soldiers from many species. It was a large ship meant to show that different species could work together. Commander Kethral led the Velthari troops on board. He was old and experienced, with scales as black as the space between stars. He had fought in dozens of battles and killed more enemies than he could count. 2 humans served on the ship as part of an exchange program. Sergeant Jake Collins was 32 years old. He had brown hair cut short and gray eyes that never seemed to show what he was thinking. He was not tall or muscular. He looked like an ordinary man you might pass on any street. The other human was Lieutenant Megan Torres. She was 28, with dark hair pulled back tight and a face that often looked serious. She had a quick temper, but she was smart and good at her job. One evening, the Velthari soldiers gathered in the recreation hall. Someone had found the human cultural database in the ship's computer. They had been reading about Earth's history, and they found something very funny. Commander Kethral stood at the center of the room. His 4 arms waved as he spoke, and his deep voice carried across the hall. Around him, 30 Velthari soldiers sat and listened. "You will not believe what I found," Kethral said. His translator turned his hissing words into common speech. "The humans have stories about their warriors. They call them myths and legends." The soldiers leaned forward with interest. "There is a story about 300 soldiers who fought against 1,000,000 enemies," Kethral continued. "They called themselves Spartans. The humans say these 300 held a narrow pass for days against an army that covered the land like a flood." The Velthari soldiers began to laugh. The sound was like stones grinding together. 300 against 1,000,000? One soldier asked. "That is impossible. No species could do such a thing." "Most species could do such a thing. It gets better," Kethral said. He was enjoying himself now. "They have stories about warriors called Vikings. These Vikings sailed across oceans in wooden boats." Wooden boats! They believed that dying in battle would send them to a great hall in the sky, where they would feast and fight forever. More laughter filled the room. Some soldiers slapped their forehands against their legs in amusement. "And there is more," Kethral went on. "They have stories about single warriors who could defeat entire armies. Men who could not be killed by normal weapons. Women who led troops into battle and never lost." A young Velthari soldier shook his head. "Why would they make up such lies? Do they not know how weak they are? Perhaps they tell these stories to make themselves feel better," another soldier suggested. "When you are small and soft, you must dream of being strong." The laughter grew louder. The Velthari thought this was the funniest thing they had heard in a long time. Jake Collins sat in the corner of the hall. He had a glass of water in his hand, and he watched the aliens laugh. His face showed nothing. He did not smile or frown. He just watched. Megan Torres sat next to him. Her hands were tight on the table, and her jaw was clenched. She did not like what she was hearing. "Are you just going to sit there?" she whispered to Jake. "They are making fun of everything our ancestors did. They are calling our history lies." Jake took a slow sip of his water. "Let them laugh," he said quietly. "Words do not win wars." "But they are insulting us," Megan said. "They think we are nothing." "I know what they think," Jake replied. "And I know what we are." Those are two different things. Commander Cathrall noticed the two humans in the corner. A smile spread across his scaled face. He walked toward them, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. The other Velthari soldiers watched with interest. Cathrall stopped at their table. He was almost 3 meters tall, and he looked down at the humans like they were small animals. "Ah, the soft ones," he said. "I hope we did not hurt your feelings with our discussion." Jake looked up at the commander. His gray eyes met Cathrall's yellow ones without any fear. "Not at all, Commander," Jake said. "You can laugh at whatever you want." Cathrall leaned closer. "Tell me, human, do you actually believe those stories? Do you think your ancestors were great warriors?" "I think every story comes from somewhere," Jake said calmly. "Old stories often carry old truths." Cathrall laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "Old truths? Your species has no claws to tear flesh, no scales to stop blades, no venom to kill enemies. You are soft and slow and fragile. What truth could your warrior stories possibly hold?" The other Velthari soldiers had gathered around now. They were all watching, all waiting to see how the human would respond. Jake did not raise his voice. He did not get angry. He simply looked at the commander and said, "Humans have been fighting wars since before we could write. We have killed each other in numbers your species cannot imagine. We have invented weapons that can burn cities and poison the air and turn the ground to glass. We learned to be dangerous because our world forced us to be." Cathrall's smile faded slightly. There was something in the human's voice, something cold and certain, that made him uncomfortable. "Every myth has roots in truth, Commander," Jake continued. "Someday, you might learn that." For a moment, the recreation hall was silent. Then Cathrall laughed again, louder than before. The other soldiers joined him. "The human thinks his people are dangerous," Cathrall announced. "How amusing. Perhaps when we return to Coalition space, I will visit your little planet. I would like to see what kind of world produces such confident prey." The Velthari walked away, still laughing. They returned to their drinks and their jokes about human mythology. Megan Torres let out a breath. "That could have gone badly," she said. Jake finished his water and set the glass down. "It went exactly how I expected." "You really think those stories matter?" Megan asked. "The Spartans, the Vikings, all of that?" Jake stood up and stretched. "Stories last for thousands of years for a reason. They teach us who we are and what we can do." He looked at the laughing Velthari soldiers. "Those aliens have been winning wars for a long time. They have forgotten what it feels like to fight someone truly dangerous. And you think humans are truly dangerous?" Megan asked. Jake turned to leave the hall. He paused at the door and looked back at her. "I think we are the most dangerous thing in this galaxy," he said. "We just have not had to prove it yet." He walked out, leaving Megan alone with her thoughts and the sound of alien laughter echoing through the hall. 3 weeks would pass before the Velthari learned the truth about human mythology. 3 weeks before Commander Cathrall understood why those old stories had survived for so long. 3 weeks before every alien on the horizon's edge discovered what a single human could do when pushed to the edge. And by then, it would be far too late for laughter. 3 weeks passed without trouble. The horizon's edge continued its patrol through Coalition space, visiting stations and carrying messages between worlds. The Velthari soldiers trained and ate and slept. They had already forgotten their jokes about human mythology. Jake Collins spent those weeks quietly. He walked the ship's corridors late at night when most others were sleeping. He studied the layout of every deck, every room, every maintenance tunnel. He memorized where the weapons were stored and where the emergency exits led. Megan Torres asked him why he did this. "Old habit," he said. "I like to know my surroundings." On the 22nd day, The horizon's edge entered the Kirith Nebula. The nebula was a massive cloud of gas and dust that stretched across 3 star systems. Ships used it as a shortcut between coalition worlds, but it was dangerous. The gas interfered with sensors and communications. A ship inside the nebula was almost blind. Captain Vren, a Valkyrie officer who commanded the entire ship, decided to pass through anyway. The nebula would save them 2 weeks of travel time. The risk seemed small, Dot. It was not small, Dot. The Draken had been waiting for them. The Draken were a hostile species that lived beyond coalition borders. They were insectoids, creatures with hard shells and sharp limbs and eyes that could see in total darkness. They raided coalition ships for supplies, technology, and slaves. They were fast and brutal and showed no mercy. The attack came without warning. One moment the horizon's edge was sailing through purple clouds of gas. The next moment, 5 Draken ships appeared from the mist like ghosts. The first volley of weapons fire tore through the ship's shields. Alarms screamed through every corridor. Lights flickered and died. The second volley hit the engines, and the horizon's edge shuddered like a wounded animal. Captain Vren shouted orders from the bridge, but it was too late. The Draken ships were already launching boarding pods. Small metal cylinders shot across the void and punched through the hull of the coalition vessel. Each pod carried 10 Draken warriors. The enemy was inside the ship within minutes. Jake was in his quarters when the attack began. He felt the ship shake and heard the alarms. He did not panic. He moved quickly to his locker and pulled out his combat gear. The coalition had given him a basic uniform and a sidearm, but Jake had brought other things from Earth, things he was not supposed to have. He strapped a knife to his thigh. It was not a fancy weapon, just a simple blade with a black handle. He had carried it through 6 wars on 3 different planets. It had saved his life more times than he could count. Megan Torres found him in the corridor outside his quarters. She had a plasma pistol in her hand and fear in her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked. "We find a defensible position," Jake said. "Stay close to me." They moved through the ship together. The corridors were chaos. Valkyrie soldiers ran in every direction, shouting orders that no one followed. The lights were out in many sections, and emergency red lights painted everything the color of blood. They heard screaming from somewhere ahead. Then the screaming stopped, and there was only silence. Jake led Megan around that corridor. He knew from the sound that whoever had been screaming was already dead. There was no point in going to help. They found Commander Kethrol in the secondary cargo bay. He had 12 of his soldiers with him. They had pushed crates together to form a barrier and were crouching behind it with weapons, ready. Kethrol's yellow eyes widened when he saw the humans. "You are still alive," he said. It sounded like he had not expected that. "For now," Jake replied. He looked around the cargo bay, studying the space. There were 3 ways in, 2 corridors, and a ventilation shaft. "How many Draken are on the ship?" "We do not know," Kethrol admitted. His voice was not as confident as before. "Communications are down. We lost contact with the bridge 10 minutes ago." A Valkyrie soldier near the barrier was shaking. His scales had turned a pale gray color. "They came out of nowhere," he said. "They moved so fast. They killed Lieutenant Vrax before he could even raise his weapon." Jake nodded. He had heard about the Draken, but had never fought them. He knew they were dangerous in close quarters. They could see in complete darkness, and their limbs were sharp enough to cut through metal. "How many entrances to this bay?" Jake asked. 3, Kethrol said. "The eastern corridor, the western corridor, and the ventilation shaft." "Too many," Jake said. "We need to seal one of them." "We cannot seal the corridors," a Valkyrie soldier said. "The door controls are damaged." Jake looked at Megan. "Can you seal the ventilation shaft?" Megan examined the shaft opening. It was wide enough for a Draken to crawl through. "I can weld it shut if I can find a torch," she said. "Do it," Jake told her. One of the Velthury soldiers had a cutting tool that could be used for welding. Megan took it and went to work on the shaft. The sound of her welding filled the cargo bay with sparks and light. The Draken came. While she was still working, they poured out of the western corridor in a wave of black shells and clicking sounds. Their eyes glowed green in the darkness, and their limbs sliced through the air as they charged. The Velthury opened fire. Plasma bolts lit up the cargo bay like lightning. Several Draken fell, their shells cracked and smoking. But more kept coming, climbing over their dead to reach the barricade. The fighting was brutal. A Velthury soldier was dragged over the barricade, and his screams echoed through the bay before going silent. Another fell with a Draken blade in his chest. Jake grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier and fired into the mass of enemies. He hit 3 Draken in quick succession, each shot finding its mark. But there were too many of them. "Fall back," Cathrall shouted. "Fall back to the intersection." The survivors retreated to the far end of the cargo bay. Megan finished sealing the ventilation shaft and rejoined them. The Draken did not follow immediately. They regrouped in the western corridor, their clicking sounds filling the air like evil music. Cathrall counted his remaining soldiers. He had started with 12. Now he had 8. 4 Velthury warriors had died in less than 2 minutes. "This is hopeless," one of the soldiers said. His voice was empty of hope. "There are too many of them. We cannot win." "There is always a way to win," Jake said quietly. Cathrall turned to look at him. The human was covered in dust and sweat, but his gray eyes were calm. He did not look afraid at all. "What do you suggest, human?" Cathrall asked. There was no mockery in his voice now, only desperation. Jake looked at the 2 remaining corridors. The Draken would attack again soon. They were probably calling for reinforcements right now. "Torres, stay here and guard the eastern corridor," Jake said. He picked up a Velthury combat blade from the floor. It was almost as long as his arm, heavy and sharp. "I will deal with the western corridor." Cathrall's widened. "You cannot go alone. There are at least 20 Draken in that direction." "Then I will kill 20 Draken," Jake said simply. He walked toward the western corridor before anyone could stop him. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. The Velthury soldiers watched him go with disbelief on their faces. Megan called after him. "Jake, wait." He paused at the edge of the darkness. He did not turn around. "Remember what I said about human myths?" he asked. "About how every story has roots in truth." "Yes," Megan said. Jake stepped into the corridor. The darkness swallowed him like a hungry mouth. "Watch the eastern corridor," his voice came back to them. "I will show these creatures where our stories came from." Then he was gone, and the Velthury soldiers were left staring at the empty doorway where a single human had walked into certain death. Commander Cathrall did not understand. No warrior in his right mind would face those odds alone. It was suicide. It was madness. But somewhere in the darkness ahead, the clicking sounds of the Draken suddenly changed. They became sharper, faster, higher pitched. They became screams. The western corridor was completely dark. The emergency lights had been destroyed during the attack, and nothing remained but blackness so thick it felt solid. Most creatures would have been blind in that darkness. The Draken were not most creatures. Their compound eyes could see heat and movement, even in total absence of light. This should have given them every advantage over a human. It did not. Jake Collins had spent 14 years in the Special Forces. He had trained in places most people did not know existed. He had learned to fight in jungles so dark that day and night meant nothing. He had learned to move without sound and strike without warning. He had learned that darkness was not an enemy. Darkness was a tool. The Draken hunting party had gathered at the end of the corridor. There were 23 of them, clicking and hissing to each other in their strange language. They were preparing for another attack on the cargo bay. They expected the soft creatures inside to be easy prey. The first Draken died without making a sound. Jake came up behind it like smoke. One hand covered its mouth to stop any noise. The blade in his other hand slid across its throat, so fast and so clean that the creature was dead before it knew anything was wrong. Jake lowered the body gently to the floor and melted back into the shadows. The second Draken died 10 seconds later. It had wandered slightly away from the group to check a side passage. Jake was waiting in that passage. The blade punched through the soft joint where the creature's head met its body. One twist, and it was over. The third Draken actually saw Jake coming. Its compound eyes detected movement in the darkness, and it opened its mouth to warn the others. But Jake was faster. His blade took the creature through the throat before any sound could escape. 3 dead in less than a minute. The other Draken had not noticed that Jake did not hurry. He had learned long ago that patience was a weapon. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. He moved through the darkness like water flowing around stones, always present, but never quite solid enough to grasp. The fourth Draken was the leader. It was larger than the others, with markings on its shell that showed its rank. Jake left it alive for now. Killing the leader too soon would create chaos, and chaos was hard to control. Better to thin the numbers first. 5, 6, 7. The bodies piled up in the darkness. Jake dragged each one into corners and side passages where they would not be found immediately. He was creating a mystery, and mysteries created fear. 8, 9. One of the Draken finally noticed that something was wrong. It clicked a question to a companion who did not answer. It clicked again. Louder this time. Still no answer. The creature turned around slowly, its green eyes scanning the darkness. It saw nothing. It heard nothing. But it felt something, some ancient instinct that told it danger was near. It was right. Jake dropped from a pipe above and landed on the Draken's back. The blade went through its skull before the creature could scream. Jake rode the body down to the floor and rolled away into the shadows. 10. Now, the other Draken knew something was very wrong. They began clicking frantically, calling out to companions who would never answer. The leader barked orders, and the remaining 13 creatures formed a tight circle with their backs together and their blades facing outward. It was a good defensive formation. Against a normal enemy, it might have worked. Jake was not a normal enemy. He picked up a piece of metal debris from the floor and threw it down a side corridor. The sound echoed in the darkness, and several Draken heads turned toward it. In that moment of distraction, Jake struck. He hit the circle like a thunderbolt. 2 Draken fell before the others even knew he was there. Then he was gone again, vanishing into the darkness before their blades could find him. The circle broke apart as the Draken chased after him. That was exactly what Jake wanted. Together, they were dangerous. Apart, they were prey. 11, 12, 13. Back in the cargo bay, Kethril and his soldiers listened to the sounds coming from the western corridor. They heard the clicking of the Draken, but the sounds were different now. There was fear in those clicks, fear and confusion, and something that sounded almost like panic. What is happening out there? One of the Velthari soldiers whispered. Megan Torres kept her eyes on the eastern corridor, watching for any sign of attack. But she allowed herself a small smile. "Sergeant Collins is happening," she said. There was a scream from the darkness. Not a human scream. A Draken scream. High and sharp and full of terror. Then silence. Then another scream. The Velthari soldiers looked at each other. They had never heard Draken scream before. They had not known the creatures could feel fear. 14. Jake was covered in blood now. Some of it was his own. from a cut on his arm where a Draken blade had grazed him. Most of it belonged to his enemies. He did not stop to rest. He did not slow down. He hunted. The Draken leader finally understood what was happening. It shouted orders for its remaining warriors to retreat back down the corridor, away from the invisible death that stalked them. But Jake had circled around behind them. 16. 17. The survivors ran into Jake's blade. He stepped out of the darkness directly in front of them, and they had no time to react. His blade moved in short, precise arcs. Each movement killed. 18. 19. The leader was alone now. The last of its warriors lay dead on the floor around it. The creature backed against a wall, its bladed limbs raised in defense. Its compound eyes searching desperately for the human who had destroyed its entire hunting party. Jake stepped out of the shadows and into the faint light from a broken panel. He was barely recognizable as human. Blood covered him from head to foot, and his gray eyes had gone cold and empty. The Draken leader stared at him. In its entire life, it had never seen anything like this. It had fought many species, killed many enemies, but it had never met anything that hunted like this human hunted. What are you? The creature clicked. Jake did not understand the language, but he understood the tone. He had heard that tone many times before, from many different enemies. It was the tone of something that had just discovered it. Was not the predator after all. Jake raised his blade. The Draken leader made one final desperate attack, its bladed limbs slashing at the human with all its remaining strength. Jake moved like flowing water. He stepped around the first strike, ducked under the second, and drove his blade up through the creature's throat. The Draken made a wet gurgling sound and collapsed. 20. The western corridor was silent now. 20 Draken warriors had come to hunt the survivors in the cargo bay. None of them would ever hunt anything again. Jake stood among the bodies and listened. He could hear more clicking sounds from deeper in the ship. The fight was not over yet. There were more Draken aboard, and they would come eventually. But for now, this corridor was clear. He wiped the blood from his blade on the shell of a dead Draken and walked back toward the cargo bay. His footsteps echoed in the silence. When he stepped into the light of the cargo bay, every Volthori soldier stared at him. They saw the blood on his clothes and the bodies in the corridor behind him. They saw the calm emptiness in his eyes. That entry point is clear, Jake said simply. Torres, you ready to move? Commander Kethril opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had led warriors into battle for 30 cycles. He had seen soldiers who were brave and soldiers who were skilled, but he had never seen anything like what this human had just done. How many? Kethril finally managed to ask. How many were there? Jake looked at the commander. 20, he said. Maybe more. I did not count. You killed 20 Draken alone? A young Volthori soldier asked. His voice was barely a whisper. They should not have turned off the lights, Jake replied. Humans get used to darkness very quickly. He walked past the stunned soldiers to check on Megan. She looked at him with something in her eyes. That might have been pride or might have been fear. Perhaps it was both. You okay? She asked. Jake nodded. Small cut on my arm. Nothing serious. He looked at the eastern corridor. They will send more soon. We need to move before they regroup. Kethril finally found his voice. Where do we go? The ship is full of them. Jake turned to face the commander. His gray eyes had lost some of their emptiness. There was something else there now. Something that looked like hunger. Then we will have to empty the ship, Jake said. One corridor at a time. He started toward the eastern passage. After a moment of hesitation, Megan followed him. One by one, the Volthori soldiers fell in behind them. Commander Kethril was the last to move. He looked at the darkness of the western corridor, at the bodies that lay hidden in its shadows, and he remembered what he had said 3 weeks ago. he had called human myths, the fantasies of a weak species. He had been wrong. The group moved through the ship like a single creature with many parts. Jake was at the front, leading them through corridors he had memorized during his late-night walks. Behind him came Megan with her plasma rifle ready. The 8 surviving Veltari soldiers followed in 2 columns, their forearms holding weapons and watching every shadow. Commander Kethral walked at the back of the formation. He was supposed to be the leader, but he had given up trying to give orders. The humans seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. Kethral was content to follow. "Engineering is 2 decks below us," Jake said quietly. "If we can restore power to the main systems, we can seal bulkheads and trap the Draken in sections of the ship." "How do you know the layout so well?" one of the Veltari soldiers asked. "I walked every corridor on this ship the first week I was aboard," Jake replied. "I like to know where I am." They reached a junction where 4 corridors met. Jake held up his hand, and everyone stopped. He listened for a long moment, his head tilted slightly to one side. "8 of them?" he whispered. "Coming from the left?" Kethral could not hear anything. His hearing was good, better than most species. But the human heard things he could not. "How do you want to handle this?" Kethral asked. Jake considered for a moment. "You and your soldiers take positions at the right corridor. When the Draken come around the corner, open fire. Torres and I will come at them from behind." "From behind?" Megan asked. "How?" Jake pointed to a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. "These passages run above the corridors. I will circle around. Wait for my signal." He jumped, caught the edge of the hatch, and pulled himself up into the maintenance passage above. Within seconds, he had vanished into the darkness. Kethral positioned his soldiers at the right corridor, weapons aimed at the junction. They waited in tense silence. The clicking of the Draken grew louder as the hunting party approached. The first Draken stepped into the junction. Then the second. Then the third. 8 insectoid warriors, their green eyes glowing, their bladed limbs ready for combat. A piece of metal fell from the ceiling behind them. The Draken spun around to look. "Now," Jake's voice called from above. The Veltari opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through the Draken from behind. At the same moment, Jake dropped from the ceiling into the middle of the enemy group. His blade flashed in the dim light. Megan fired from her position, picking off any Draken that tried to flee. The fight lasted 8 seconds. When it was over, 8 more Draken lay dead. Jake cleaned his blade and nodded to Kethral. "Good shooting," he said. Kethral stared at the bodies. "You drew their attention so we could hit them from behind. You used yourself as bait." "It worked," Jake said simply. They continued toward engineering. 2 more times they encountered Draken patrols. 2 more times Jake led them into traps that left no survivors. The Veltari soldiers began to change. At first they had been afraid, desperate, ready to give up. Now they moved with purpose. They followed Jake's orders without question. They had seen what was possible when you did not accept defeat. Engineering was a large space filled with machines and control panels. Ken Draken had made it their base. They had killed the original crew and were trying to take control of the ship's systems. Jake studied the room from a maintenance access point above. He could see the Draken working at the consoles. He could see where they had positioned guards at the entrances. "Too many to surprise," he said to Kethral, who had climbed up beside him. "We need a different approach. What do you suggest?" Jake thought for a moment. "Your people are stronger than the Draken in direct combat. Their advantage is speed and surprise. If we take away the surprise, can your soldiers beat them?" Kethral's eyes narrowed. "Yes," he said. "In a straight fight, we would win. Then we give you a straight fight." Jake pointed to 3 different positions around the engineering room. "Put 2 soldiers at each of those points. When I give the signal, charge in at the same time. Hit them fast and hard. Do not give them time to use their speed. Catherall nodded slowly. And what will you do? I will kill their guards first. When you hear the guards die, that is your signal. The Valkyrie commander looked at Jake for a long moment. In my culture, we have a word for warriors who fight like you. We call them Deathbringers. I used to think it was only a legend. Every legend starts somewhere, Jake said. They moved into position. Jake crawled through the maintenance passages until he was directly above the first guard. The Draken stood with its back to a wall, watching the main entrance. It never looked up. Jake dropped onto its shoulders and snapped its neck before it could make a sound. He lowered the body and moved toward the second guard. The second guard was more alert. Its head turned constantly, watching for threats. But it was watching the wrong direction. Jake came at it from the side, through a gap between two machines. The blade went through its throat so quickly that the creature did not have time to blink. The third guard heard something. It started to turn, started to raise its weapon, started to call out a warning. Jake threw his knife. The blade buried itself in the guard's chest, and the creature fell without a sound. Jake retrieved his knife and looked at the 7 remaining Draken at the control consoles. They had not noticed anything yet. He whistled once, a sharp sound that echoed through the engineering room. The Valkyrie charged in from 3 directions at once. They hit the Draken like a 4-armed wave of muscle and scales. The battle was brutal but brief. The insectoids tried to use their speed, tried to slip away from the Valkyrie strikes, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded. Jake joined the fight for the last few seconds. He moved between the Valkyrie soldiers, finishing any Draken who tried to escape. When it was over, all 10 enemies lay dead, and not a single Valkyrie had fallen. Megan reached the control consoles and began working. Her fingers flew across the panels as she restored power to critical systems. Got it, she said after a minute. Bulkheads are coming online. I can seal sections of the ship. Do it, Jake said. Trap as many as you can. Megan worked quickly. Throughout the ship, heavy doors slammed shut. Draken hunting parties found themselves trapped in corridors with no way out. The clicking sounds of their communication grew frantic as they realized what was happening. I am showing 37 Draken still active on the ship, Megan reported. 20 of them are now sealed in sectors we control. And the other 17? Catherall asked, moving toward the bridge. They are trying to take control of the ship. Jake checked his blade. Then we go to the bridge. The Valkyrie soldiers formed up behind him without being asked. Something had changed in the way they looked at the human. It was not quite respect. It was something deeper than that. It was the way you look at something you have seen do impossible things. They moved through the ship toward the bridge. The corridors were quiet now. Most of the Draken were either dead or trapped. But the ones heading for the bridge were the most dangerous. They were desperate, and desperate enemies were unpredictable. Jake found them trying to cut through the bridge doors. The heavy metal was resisting their blades, but it would not hold forever. We hit them from behind, Jake said. Torres, find a high position and provide cover fire. Catherall, your soldiers will engage directly. I will handle their leader. The Draken commander was easy to spot. It was the largest one, standing at the back and directing the others. Jake had learned that killing leaders created confusion. Confusion won battles. They attacked without warning. Megan opened fire from a raised platform, her plasma bolts cutting down 3 Draken before they could react. The Valkyrie soldiers charged with roars that shook the corridor. The Draken scattered, their formation broken. Jake moved through the chaos like a ghost. He dodged between fighting soldiers, slipped past slashing blades, and reached the Draken commander in seconds. The creature saw him coming. It raised its bladed limbs and struck with all its strength. Jake blocked the first strike, deflected the second, and stepped inside the creature's guard. His blade went up through its jaw and into its brain. The Draken commander fell. The remaining warriors looked around and saw their leader dead. They saw their companions falling one by one. They saw the human standing among them with blood on his blade and death in his eyes. They ran. The survivors fled toward the airlock where their boarding pods waited. Jake followed them but did not kill them. When Megan found him later, she was confused. "You let them escape? Why?" Jake watched the boarding pods detach from the horizon's edge and fly back toward the Draken ships. "They will tell the others what happened here," he said. "They will describe how a human hunted them through dark corridors and killed their commanders. Fear travels faster than any ship." "You want them to be afraid," Megan said. Jake nodded. "Fear is a weapon." The old warriors knew that. The Vikings made sure stories of their raids spread far and wide. The Spartans became legends because everyone talked about their last stand. Fear keeps enemies away. It saves lives. On the bridge, the crew members who had survived began to restore ship functions. Captain Vren was injured but alive. Commander Kethrol reported to him with a voice that sounded different than before. The mocking tone was gone, replaced by something quieter and more careful. "How many did we lose?" Captain Vren asked. 18 Valkyrie CRE. The horizon's edge limped through space for 3 days before reaching Coalition territory. The ship was badly damaged. Holes in the hull had been patched with emergency sealant. The engines worked at only half power. But the ship was alive, and so were most of its crew. During those 3 days, the Valkyrie soldiers changed. Before the attack, they had ignored the humans. Jake and Megan were soft creatures from a weak planet, barely worth noticing. Now the Valkyrie watched them constantly. They stepped aside when Jake walked through corridors. They lowered their voices when he was nearby. They looked at him the way they might look at a dangerous predator that had chosen not to attack them. Commander Kethrol spent hours reviewing the ship's internal recordings. He watched Jake move through the dark corridors again and again. He watched the blade flash and the Draken fall. He watched one human kill more enemies in a single night than most soldiers killed in their entire careers. The recordings did not make sense. Jake was not fast enough to dodge Draken blades. He was not strong enough to overpower them. He should have died a dozen times over. But he had not died. Instead, he had killed and killed and killed until there was no one left to kill. Kethrol did not understand how such a thing was possible. But he had seen it with his own eyes, and that was enough. When the horizon's edge reached Coalition space, a rescue fleet was waiting for them. Ships from a dozen species surrounded the damaged cruiser and escorted it to the nearest station. Medical teams came aboard to treat the wounded. Officials came to gather reports about the attack. Commander Kethrol was called to give testimony before the Coalition Council. The council was made up of representatives from all member species. They gathered in a great chamber where holographic displays showed the faces of leaders from across the galaxy. Kethrol told them everything. He described the attack, the boarding, the desperate fight in the cargo bay. He described watching Jake Collins walk alone into a corridor full of Draken warriors. He described what came after. Of the 47 Draken who boarded our ship, Kethrol said, 6 escaped. The rest are dead. 23 of those kills were made by Sergeant Jake Collins. 1 human. The council chamber was silent. Representatives looked at each other with confusion and disbelief. 1 human killed 23 Draken? A delegate asked. She was a tall creature with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. How is that possible? I do not know, Kethrol admitted. I have served the Empire for 30 cycles. I have fought enemies across a dozen worlds. but I have never seen anything like Sergeant Collins." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 3 weeks before the attack, I mocked the humans. I laughed at their mythology and called them weak. I was wrong. What do you mean? Another delegate asked. Catherall turned to face the entire council. His yellow eyes were serious, all trace of his former arrogance gone. "Humans have stories about their warriors," he said. "Stories of soldiers who held impossible positions against impossible odds. Stories of fighters who faced death without fear. Stories of men and women who became legends because they refused to accept defeat." He took a breath. "I thought these stories were lies. Fantasies created by a weak species trying to feel powerful. I was wrong. The human myths are not fantasy," Catherall continued. "They are memory. They remember what they are capable of. They pass these lessons down from generation to generation, encoding them in stories so that every human child grows up knowing what their ancestors could do." He looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting his words across the galaxy. "We mocked their legends. We thought Spartans and Vikings and warriors who laughed at death were fiction. We were too arrogant to recognize a warning when we saw one." "A warning?" the blue-skinned delegate asked. "Yes, a warning. Those stories were humanity's way of telling the galaxy what they could do. What they would do if pushed hard enough." Catherall shook his head slowly. "I watched a human walk into darkness against 20 armed enemies, and he killed them all. I watched him move like smoke and strike like lightning. I watched him do things that should have been impossible." He paused one final time. "The humans are not weak," he said. "They never were. They simply had not shown us their true nature. Now we have seen it, and we must remember. Their myths were not dreams of strength. They were memories of what happens when humanity decides something must die." The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations. Delegates from different species talked rapidly to each other, trying to understand what they had just heard. At the back of the chamber, Jake Collins stood quietly in his blood-stained uniform. Megan Torres stood beside him, watching the council's reaction. "They believe him," Megan said softly. "They actually believe him." Jake watched the delegates arguing. Some looked skeptical. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked genuinely afraid. "Good," Jake said. "Fear keeps peace. If they fear humans enough, they will think twice before attacking us." "Is that what you wanted?" Megan asked. "To make them afraid?" Jake was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I wanted to survive. Fear is just a side effect." In the weeks that followed, the story spread across the coalition like fire. Ships carried the tale from station to station, world to world. Aliens who had never met a human began to talk about the warrior from Earth who had killed 23 Draken in the dark. The story grew with each telling. Some versions said Jake had killed 30 enemies. Others said 50. One popular version claimed he had faced an entire Draken army alone and walked away without a scratch. Jake did not correct these stories. He understood the power of legends. The more the galaxy feared humans, the safer humans would be. The Draken raiders changed their behavior almost immediately. Ships with human crew aboard were left alone. Stations with human personnel were avoided. The insectoid raiders had learned a hard lesson about prey that fought back. Other species began to look at humans differently too. Where once they had seen small, soft creatures from a backwater world, they now saw something more dangerous. Something unpredictable. Something that perhaps should not be underestimated. Coalition military commanders started requesting human advisors. They wanted to learn how Jake had done what he did. They wanted to understand human tactics, human training, human thinking. Jake found himself teaching classes to Volturi officers who once would have laughed at the idea of learning from a human. Catherall attended every class. One evening, After the other students had left, Kethril approached Jake. The commander moved differently now, with respect instead of contempt. "I owe you an apology," Kethril said, "for what I said in the recreation hall, for calling your ancestors' stories lies." Jake shook his head. "No apology needed. You did not know. That is exactly why I apologize. I should have known. I should have looked at your species and wondered how such fragile creatures could have survived long enough to reach the stars." Kethril's yellow eyes were thoughtful. "Soft skin. No claws. No venom. No natural armor. Your world should have killed you long before you invented fire." "It tried," Jake said. "Many times. We just refused to die." Kethril nodded slowly. "Yes, I understand that now. Your species is not soft. You are flexible. You bend, but you do not break. You lose battles, but you learn from each loss. You fall down, but you stand back up." He paused. "There is a saying in your culture, yes? About falling down and rising again? Fall 7 times. Stand up 8, Jake said. Yes, add." Kethril made a gesture that might have been a smile. "We Velthari have nothing like that saying. We believe that falling is failure. Your people believe that falling is just the beginning of getting back up." Jake looked at the commander for a long moment. "Every species has its strengths," he said. "Yours is power. You are born strong and you die strong. Ours is endurance. We were born weak, so we learned to survive anything. And now you are strong too," Kethril said. Jake nodded. "Now we are strong too." They stood together in silence for a while. Outside the windows of the station, stars burned cold and bright against the darkness of space. Somewhere out there, Draken raiders were avoiding human ships. Somewhere out there, alien species were learning a new word: fear. "Do you think they will ever attack Earth?" Kethril asked. Jake considered the question. "Maybe someday. Some species will always think they can win. And if they attack?" Jake turned from the window. His gray eyes were calm and empty and full of something old and dangerous. "Then they will learn what we learned a long time ago," he said. "Humans do not know how to surrender. We do not know how to accept defeat. We will fight until we are dead, and then we will fight some more. We will turn our entire planet into a weapon if we have to. We will make the cost of victory so high that no one would ever want to pay it." He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at Kethril. "The Spartans held Thermopylae because they knew something that most species forget," Jake said. "Death is not the worst thing that can happen to a warrior. The worst thing is giving up. The worst thing is surrender. The worst thing is letting the enemy win. And humans never surrender?" Kethril asked. Jake smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of something that had seen too much darkness and had learned to thrive in it. "Never," he said. "That is why our myths last for thousands of years. That is why our legends are still told after our heroes are